I did not cry. I did not confront her. I simply picked up my wine glass, looked my sister-in-law directly in the eyes, and smiled. Her name was Brielle Saunderson, 34 years old. My husband's younger sister, and she had just forged my dead father's signature on a document that would have transferred a 40% stake in his company straight into her hands. She didn't know I had already seen it. My father, Ronald Kepler, built Kepler Logistics from nothing. He started it in 1987 out of a rented garage in Columbus, Ohio. 2 trucks, 1 client, and more debt than sense. By the time I was in high school, he had a regional fleet and 42 employees. By the time I graduated from the state, he had contracts with 3 national distributors. He was not a flashy man. He did not drive a Ferrari or wear a Rolex. He drove a Ford F-150 with a cracked dashboard and ate lunch at the same diner every Tuesday for 30 years. But he built something real, and he built it for our family. When he was diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's in 2019, he started getting his affairs in order, slowly, carefully, the way he did everything. He met with his attorney, Howard Fenwick, a man he had trusted for over 2 decades, and they updated his estate plan. The terms were clear. His company would pass to me, his only daughter, in full. His house would go to a charitable trust he cared about. His liquid assets would be divided between me and a college fund he set up for his 2 grandchildren. He told me all of this himself, sitting at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold in front of him. He was not sentimental about it. He just wanted me to know. I worked too hard for this to get complicated after I'm gone, he said. I told him he wasn't going anywhere. He gave me the look he always gave me when I said something he considered wishful thinking. He passed away 14 months later. February. The ground was frozen, and the sky was the specific gray that Ohio does better than anywhere else on Earth. I was 37 years old. My husband, Joel Merritt, was beside me at the funeral. Me sat 1 row behind us. His mother, Constance, 71, widowed, and Brielle, who had flown in from Phoenix. Brielle wore a black dress that fit like she had planned this event in advance. She hugged me at the graveside and told me my father had been like a father to her too. I nodded. I held her hand for a moment. I believed her. That was the last time I believed anything she told me. The week after the funeral, Howard Fenwick's office called to schedule the estate reading. Standard process. I drove downtown on a Thursday morning and sat across from Howard at a conference table that smelled like old carpet and printer toner. He slid a copy of the documents across to me. I read through the first 2 pages. Everything looked as my father had described. Then I turned to page 4. There was an amendment, dated 6 weeks before my father's death. It stated that 40% of Kepler Logistics would transfer not to me alone, but would be divided. 60% to me, 40% to Brielle Ann Saunderson, in recognition of her contributions to the family and her long-term investment of time and care. I read it twice. Howard, I said, what is this? He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Something between discomfort and confusion. Your father submitted this amendment in January, he said. I'll be honest with you, it came through a secondary channel. Not through my direct office. It was filed correctly. The notarization appears valid. Can I see the original? He slid it across. I looked at the signature line. My father had Parkinson's. His handwriting in his last year was shaky, uneven, with letters that drifted slightly downward. I had watched him sign Christmas cards 3 months before he died. I knew what his signature looked like in that period. The signature on this amendment was too clean. The letters were too steady. The pen pressure was too even. I did not say this to Howard. I thanked him, folded my copy, and put it in my bag. I drove home. I sat in my car in the driveway for 11 minutes before I went inside. Joel was working from home that day. He came out of his office when he heard me come in, took 1 look at my face and said, "What happened?" I put the document on the kitchen counter. He read it standing up. His expression went through several phases. Confusion, then concentration, then something very still and very controlled that I recognized from the years I had known him. Joel had been a financial crimes investigator for the Department of Justice for 6 years before moving to the private sector. He did not alarm easily, but when he went still like that, it meant he was taking something seriously. "How confident are you that this isn't real?" he said. "The signature," I said. "Dad's hands were bad by January. This doesn't look like January hands." He nodded slowly. "Okay, let me make some calls." What Joel did over the next 3 weeks, I can only partially describe, because some of it he kept from me deliberately, not to hide things, but because he did not want me reacting to each development before he understood it fully. What I do know is that he reached out to 2 former colleagues at the Financial Crimes Unit in Cincinnati, pulled records related to notary filings in the county for the relevant date window, and quietly requested that Howard Fenwick provide the full documentation chain for how the amendment had been submitted. He also called his sister twice during this period. Normal calls, checking in. "How are you settling in after the trip? Did you find a good place for the memorial?" Brielle had no idea. What he found took the ground out from under everything. The notary stamp on the amendment belonged to a woman named Greta Dunham, a licensed notary in Franklin County. Joel tracked her down, not confrontationally, but through a mutual contact who knew her professionally. When he mentioned the specific document, she went quiet for a moment. Then she said she had never notarized anything for a man named Ronald Kepler. She had, however, notarized a document for a woman who had presented herself as a family representative. Given her a business card with a law firm letterhead, Joel later confirmed did not exist and asked her to stamp an already prepared packet of papers. The woman had assured her this was standard estate procedure. Greta had been new to her practice at the time and had not followed proper verification protocol. She was mortified. She was also cooperative. Joel sat me down on a Sunday evening. He laid out everything on the dining room table. The notary statement, the record of the fake law firm, the email trail he had reconstructed, through contacts I will not fully detail here, that showed Brielle had been communicating with a document preparation service in Arizona. One with a history of involvement in probate fraud, beginning 4 months before my father died. She had been planning this before he was even gone. I sat with that for a long time. What I felt was not the kind of anger that makes you loud. It was the cold kind. The kind that settles in your chest and makes everything very clear and very quiet. I thought about the graveside, her hand in mine. He was like a father to me, too. I thought about what my father had said at his kitchen table. "I worked too hard for this to get complicated after I'm gone." "What do we do?" I said. Joel said, "We do this right." The first call was to Howard Fenwick, who by this point had grown deeply uncomfortable with the situation and was relieved to have documentation that exonerated his office from any wrongdoing. He retained independent forensic document examiners to analyze the signature. The report came back 11 days later. Signature was inconsistent with known samples of Ronald Kepler's handwriting from the same period, showing notably different pressure patterns and letter formation incompatible with documented Parkinson's progression. The second call was to the Franklin County DA's office. The third call was to a civil litigation attorney named Francis Aldridge, who specialized in probate fraud and estate disputes, and who told me within 20 minutes of reviewing the evidence that this was one of the cleaner cases she had seen in terms of documentation. "Clean in the sense that the paper trail is clear," she said. "Not clean in any other sense." We did not tell Brielle anything. Not yet. The estate reading had been paused pending review. Howard had discretion to do this, and Brielle had been calling me every few days asking for updates. I took her calls. I kept my voice even. I told her Howard was being thorough, that these things took time. She made sympathetic sounds. She said she knew I must be exhausted dealing with all of this on top of grief. "It's a lot," I agreed. "Well, I'm here for you," she said. "Whatever you need." The thing is, up until 2 months before this, I had liked Brielle. She was funny, sharp, good at remembering things. The kind of person who shows up to a dinner party with the exact wine you mentioned once in passing 6 months earlier. She and I had gotten close over the years. I had thought of her as a real sister, not just a legal one. That was maybe the hardest part. Harder than the fraud itself. Harder than the paperwork and the legal fees and the months of uncertainty. The hardest part was rearranging every memory I had of her and wondering which moments had been real and which had been positioning. Constance, Joel's mother, did not know. I was certain of that. She is the kind of woman who organizes church fundraisers and mails birthday cards 3 days early so they arrive on time. She had adored my father. She would have been destroyed to know what her daughter had done. I kept her out of it entirely, which she later told me she was grateful for, and also heartbroken about, in equal measure. The DA's office moved at the pace these things move, which is to say not quickly. But they moved. A detective was assigned. Brielle was contacted for what was described as a routine follow-up regarding the estate filing. She called me afterward, voice tightly controlled, asking if I knew what this was about. "I think they're just being thorough," I said. "It's standard with contested documents." "Contested?" she said. "Who contested it?" "I don't know the details," I said. "Howard would know more." There was a pause, just a breath too long. "Okay," she said. "I'm sure it'll be fine." It was not fine. Francis filed the civil suit in April. The criminal referral had already been made. When Brielle's attorney reached out to Francis to discuss settlement options, it confirmed what we already knew. She had understood the moment she was contacted that the document wasn't going to hold. What came out in the civil discovery process was worse than I had expected in scope, if not in kind. Brielle had not acted alone in the logistical sense. The document preparation service in Arizona, a man named Wade Kessler, who ran it out of a suite of offices that also appeared to handle tax preparation and notary services, had a client list that included several other families in similar situations. He was already under investigation in 2 other states. Brielle had found him through an online forum, of all things, a place where people discussed estate law loopholes. She had paid him $4,800. That was what 40% of my father's company was worth to her in effort. $4,800 and some planning. Kepler Logistics, at the time of my father's death, had been valued at approximately $3.2 million. I want to be clear about something. I am not a vindictive person. I have never enjoyed conflict. I spent most of my childhood trying to smooth things over, trying to be the reasonable one, trying to make sure no one in any room I was in felt uncomfortable because of anything I had done. That quality has cost me things over the years. Moments where I should have spoken up and didn't, boundaries I should have held and let go instead. But there is a line, and Brielle had stepped across it in the direction of my dead father's name. The criminal case resulted in Brielle being charged with probate fraud and forgery. Wade Kessler was charged separately in Arizona and Ohio. Brielle took a plea agreement, 18 months of probation, restitution, and a fine, in exchange for her cooperation in identifying other clients of Kessler's operation. It was not the outcome I would have chosen if I were designing justice from scratch. But Francis told me that given Brielle's clean record and the cooperation deal, it was the realistic outcome, and fighting for more would have cost me another 2 years and significant legal fees with no guarantee of a different result. ICE accepted it. The civil case settled. The amendment was voided. Kepler Logistics transferred to me in full, exactly as my father had intended. There was one conversation I have not yet described, and I want to describe it because it is the part I think about most. About a week before the civil settlement was finalized, Brielle called me. Not her attorney, her. She called from her personal cell phone on a Tuesday evening. I almost didn't answer. But I did. She started with an apology. It was a long one. It had the structure of an apology someone has rehearsed, organized, hitting the expected notes, moving through acknowledgement toward explanation. She talked about her financial situation, about a failed business venture she had not told anyone about debt she had accumulated over several years that had made her feel she said, desperate and invisible. I listened to all of it without interrupting. Then I said, Brielle, I need you to understand something. I'm not angry at you for being in financial trouble. I'm not angry at you for being desperate. People get desperate. That's human. What I cannot get past is that you sat beside me at my father's funeral and held my hand. You looked me in the face. And you were already planning this. She didn't say anything. He trusted me to protect what he built, I said. That's all I did. I hung up. I sat there for a moment in the quiet of the kitchen. Then I called my mother, who is 71 and lives 20 minutes away, and I told her that everything had been resolved. She asked if I was okay. I told her I was getting there. I still run Kepler Logistics. I changed some things, brought in a new operations director, modernized the dispatch software, opened a second facility in Dayton. The company that my father built out of a garage in 1987 is doing better than it has in a decade. I think about him sometimes when I'm walking the facility floor, watching the trucks come in and out, and I think he would have found the whole situation appalling. And also, in some private way, satisfying. Not that it happened, but that it was handled cleanly. He was a man who believed in doing things right. Not loudly, not dramatically. Right, I learned that from him. It turned out, when it mattered most, I had actually learned it. Constance and I still have lunch sometimes. We don't talk about Brielle. There is a version of this story where that relationship was destroyed too. Where I lost not just a sister-in-law but a second mother. And Joel lost the family dinners that used to feel easy. That version is not the one we're in. I'm grateful for that every time I see her. Joel and I planted a tree in the backyard last spring. A white oak. The kind my father always said was the only tree worth planting, because it takes forever to grow, and you'll probably never see it at full height, but someone will. We planted it next to the fence where the light is good. We haven't named it anything. It doesn't need a name. It just needs time. If you have ever stood in a room and known something was wrong, really known it, in the part of yourself that doesn't make noise, I want you to know that the quiet knowledge is worth trusting. The people who love you the right way will not ask you to doubt it. They will sit down beside you and help you figure out what to do next. That is what a real family does. And sometimes you build that family yourself out of whatever materials you have. The same my father built his company out of a rented garage and a belief that honest work was worth doing. Hold on to what's yours. Not out of greed, out of respect for whoever built it and handed it to you with their whole heart.